In the ruthless world of rock and roll, there are few jobs more impossible than replacing a legend. It's a poisoned chalice, an invitation to be forever compared, judged, and usually found wanting. In 1980, the job opening was the stuff of nightmares. Follow the iconic swaggering Catman, Peter Criss, as the drummer for Kiss, the biggest, most theatrical, and most branded band on the planet. Thousands of drummers from around the world sent in their tapes, each one dreaming of grabbing that brass ring. The odds were astronomical. You had a better chance of being struck by lightning while cashing a winning lottery ticket. But one man, a humble, hard-working musician from Brooklyn, beat those odds. He was a guy who fixed gas stoves to make ends meet, a guy who played in wedding bands, a guy who was so starstruck on his audition that he asked for the band's autographs at the end. His name was Paul Caravello, and landing the job was a fairy tale. He was given a new name, a new face, and a new life as Eric Carr, the Fox. For a decade, he lived the dream, providing the thunderous heartbeat for one of rock's greatest acts. But fairy tales have a way of turning dark. Behind the makeup, the fire-breathing, and the screaming fans, a different story was unfolding. It was a story of quiet dedication, of a gentle soul in a world of massive egos, and ultimately, a story of a heartbreaking illness, a lonely death, and a legacy that was almost erased by the very machine that created it. This is the story of the man behind the fox mask and why his tragic end still resonates so deeply with fans who refuse to let his memory fade. To understand the whirlwind Eric Carr stepped into, you have to understand the state of Kiss in 1980. The band was at a dangerous crossroads. The 1970s had been their decade. They were gods of the arena, a marketing juggernaut that sold not just records, but lunchboxes, pinball machines, and comic books printed with their own blood. But by the turn of the decade, the Kiss empire was showing cracks. The raw, gritty hard rock that made them famous had been diluted. Their last two albums, the disco-tinged Dynasty and the pop-polished Unmasked, had alienated a huge portion of their original leather-clad fan base. Internal turmoil was rampant. Drummer Peter Criss, whose jazzy, street-smart drumming style defined their early sound, was battling drug addiction and was creatively at odds with the band's leaders Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons. His departure was messy and public, leaving a gaping hole behind the drum kit. For the first time, the invincible, godlike image of Kiss was broken. They were mortal. They needed new blood, and they needed it fast. They needed someone who could not only play, but who could handle the crushing pressure of stepping into a pre-existing mythology. The search was on for a musician who could deliver a thunderous, powerful sound to drag the band back to its hard rock roots and away from the pop charts. The world they were offering a newcomer wasn't the glorious ascent of the 70s. It was a salvage mission, a high-stakes gamble to save a faltering dynasty. Into this maelstrom walked Paul Caravello. He was born in 1950 and raised in Brownsville, Brooklyn, a world away from the limousines and luxury of rock stardom. He was the son of a hard-working immigrant family, a quiet, creative kid who fell in love with music. Like so many of his generation, his world was turned upside down by the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. He saw Ringo star, and he knew what he wanted to do. He soon became obsessed with the drumming giants of the era, John Bonham of Led Zeppelin, Ginger Baker of Cream. He wasn't just a fan, he was a student. He would sit for hours, analyzing their techniques, absorbing their power and flair. His dream was to be a rock star, but the reality was far more mundane. For over 15 years, Paul was a journeyman musician, a grinder. He played in a string of bands with names that are now lost to time: the Cellarmen, Salt and Pepper, Creation. They played everything from top 40 covers to disco to hard rock, performing in small clubs and at weddings. He was a versatile, powerful drummer, but the big break never came. To support himself, he took a job his father helped him get, repairing gas ranges for a local utility company. It was steady, unglamorous work. He'd spend his days with his hands covered in grease and his nights behind a drum kit, hoping that this would be the gig that led to something more. He was in his late 20s, an age when many musicians give up the dream for a more stable life. He was talented, he was dedicated, but he was going nowhere fast. Then, in May of 1980, everything changed. A friend told him about a cryptic ad in the music newspaper Melody Maker. It announced that a world-famous, internationally known rock band was holding auditions for a new drummer. It didn't name the band, but the requirements, power, creativity, and the ability to handle heavy rock, pointed in one direction: Kiss. Paul was hesitant. This was Kiss, a band of superheroes. He was a guy who fixed stoves. It seemed impossible, but he put together a demo tape and a small press kit. To make it stand out from the mountain of submissions he knew they'd receive, he put his application inside a fluorescent orange folder. Weeks went by, and he heard nothing. He figured his orange folder had ended up in the trash with all the others. Then, one day, while in the bath, his mother yelled that he had a phone call. It was the band's manager, Bill O'Coin. They'd listened to his tape. They liked it. They wanted him to come in for an audition. Paul was stunned. He borrowed a pair of pants from his brother-in-law and headed into Manhattan. When he arrived, he found himself in a rehearsal studio face-to-face with his idols, Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, and Ace Frehley, in the flesh. They were just guys, without the makeup and costumes, but to him they were titans. He was nervous, but he was also prepared. He had studied their music for years. He knew every song, every fill, every beat. They asked him to play Strutter and Black Diamond, two of their most iconic tracks. He launched into them with a power and precision that immediately got their attention. His style was heavier, more direct, and more explosive than Peter Criss's. It was the sound of 80s heavy metal, not 70s rock and roll. It was exactly what they were looking for. After he finished, he did something that sealed the deal. He sheepishly asked them if he could have their autographs to show his friends. That moment of genuine fan-like humility charmed them completely. They weren't just hiring a musician. They were hiring a fan, someone who loved and respected the band. He was the last drummer they auditioned. The job was his. Paul Caravello, the stove repairman from Brooklyn, was about to become a rock and roll god. But first, he had to die. His old identity was shed, and he was reborn as Eric Carr. Now he needed a persona, a character to complete the Kiss mythology. This was a serious process. The band's first idea was a hawk. They even had a costume and makeup design mocked up. But it didn't feel right to Paul. It felt aggressive, predatory. He wanted something that reflected his own personality. He suggested a fox known for being cunning, quick, and adaptable. The band loved it. The fox was born. His first official gig was on July 25, 1980, at the Palladium in New York City. It was the first time an American audience would see Kiss with a new member. The pressure was immense. Backstage, he was so nervous he could barely function. He put his makeup on, squeezed into the costume, and walked toward the stage. As he stepped into the spotlight and saw the sea of faces, a wave of adrenaline hit him. He sat behind the massive drum kit, counted off the first song, and for the next 2 hours he played with a ferocity and joy that won the crowd over. The fairy tale had begun. For the next 11 years, Eric Carr was the engine of Kiss. He provided a foundation of thunderous, driving rhythm that propelled the band through a new era. He was instrumental in their transition back to a heavier sound on albums like Creatures of the Night, a record now considered a classic by hardcore fans, largely due to Eric's powerful drumming. He was more than just a timekeeper. He was a talented musician who also played guitar, bass, and piano, and had a great singing voice. He even co-wrote some of the band's material, most notably taking the lead vocal on the song Little Caesar from the Hot in the Shade album, a tribute to his late father. In 1983, Kiss made the momentous decision to take off the makeup. For Gene, Paul, and Ace, it was a return to their original faces. But for Eric, it was a strange and unsettling transition. His entire public identity had been the Fox. He was the only member of Kiss the world had never seen without a mask. He was nervous that the mystique would be gone, that he would just be some anonymous guy in the band. But the unmasking had the opposite effect. It allowed his warm, gentle personality to shine through. Fans quickly discovered that Eric was the most approachable, down-to-earth member of the band. In a world of oversized egos and rock star posturing, he was unfailingly kind and generous with his time. Stories abound of him staying for hours after shows to sign every last autograph and talk to every fan who waited. He treated them not as customers, but as friends. He would remember their names, ask about their lives, and make them feel seen. This genuine connection built him an intensely loyal following. For a new generation of fans who came to the band in the 80s, he wasn't the replacement drummer. He was the drummer for Kiss. He was also a man with his own creative dreams. Away from the band, he was developing an idea for a children's cartoon called The Rockheads, about a rock band made up of characters with rock-shaped heads. He wrote the music, designed the characters, and poured his own money into the project. It was his baby, a sign that he had ambitions beyond the confines of the Kiss machine. He was living a life he had only dreamed of, beloved by millions, creatively fulfilled, and a crucial part of a legendary band's second act. But in early 1991, the dream began to crumble. The first indication of trouble for Eric Carr, the drummer of Kiss, emerged as a persistent cough accompanied by flu-like symptoms that lingered far beyond what he initially attributed to the rigors of touring. In early 1991, Carr dismissed these signs as mere fatigue from the band's demanding schedule, which included extensive travel, high-energy performances, and the physical toll of maintaining his role in one of rock music's most theatrical acts. Kiss, known for their elaborate makeup, pyrotechnics, and larger-than-life stage presence, required each member to deliver peak physical performance night after night. Carr, who had joined the band in 1980 after Peter Criss's departure, was integral to this dynamic, his powerful drumming style and charismatic energy contributing to albums like Creatures of the Night, 1982, and Lick It Up, 1983. At 40 years old, he was in what should have been the prime of his career, but the symptoms worsened, evolving from a nagging cough to severe shortness of breath that left him struggling during routine activities. During a photo shoot in the spring of 1991, Carr's condition became alarmingly evident. He found himself unable to stand for extended periods, gasping for air and feeling an overwhelming weakness that no amount of rest could alleviate. This episode prompted him to seek medical attention, leading to initial tests that revealed inflammation in his heart. Doctors first diagnosed it as pericarditis, an inflammation of the sac surrounding the heart, which they believed was benign and treatable. However, further examinations, including biopsies and imaging scans, uncovered a far more sinister reality. In April 1991, following exploratory surgery, Carr was diagnosed with atrial myxoma, initially thought to be a benign tumor, but subsequent pathology reports confirmed it was atrial carcinoma, an extremely rare and aggressive form of heart cancer. This type of cancer, affecting the heart's upper chambers, is diagnosed in only a handful of cases annually worldwide, with a poor prognosis due to its rapid spread and difficulty in treatment. The diagnosis struck like a thunderbolt, shattering the life of a man whose professional identity was built on physical strength, endurance, and the adrenaline-fueled spectacle of rock performance. Now, facing a disease that attacked the very organ symbolizing vitality, Carr confronted a battle that no amount of stage presence or musical talent could overcome. Carr's diagnosis came at a pivotal moment for Kiss, highlighting the harsh realities of the music industry where personal hardships often clashed with unrelenting business obligations. The band was in the process of recording a follow-up to their 1989 album, Hot in the Shade, which had marked a commercial resurgence with hits like Forever. The new project, eventually titled Revenge and released in 1992, aimed to build on this momentum with a heavier, more aggressive sound, influenced by the grunge and metal trends of the early 1990s. Producers like Bob Ezrin were involved, and the band had commitments to their label, Mercury Records, as well as tour schedules and promotional appearances that demanded continuity. As Carr began grueling chemotherapy treatments, which involved aggressive regimens of drugs like doxorubicin and cyclophosphamide to target the cancer cells in his heart, the physical toll was immediate and severe. Chemotherapy for heart cancer is particularly challenging, as the drugs can further weaken cardiac function, leading to side effects like nausea, hair loss, extreme fatigue, and increased susceptibility to infections. Carr's stamina, essential for drumming, diminished rapidly, making it impossible for him to participate in recording sessions that required hours of precise, high-energy performance. Despite this, the band faced deadlines, album production timelines, marketing plans, and financial pressures from record sales expectations could not be halted. In a decision that has sparked ongoing controversy, Kiss hired Eric Singer, a seasoned drummer who had worked with bands like Black Sabbath and Union, to fill in for Carr during the Revenge sessions. From the band's perspective, as expressed in numerous interviews by Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, this was a pragmatic necessity. They emphasized that Carr remained on full salary, with the band covering his medical expenses, which included hospital stays, surgeries, and ongoing treatments estimated to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Stanley and Simmons have repeatedly stated that they believed Carr would recover and return, viewing Singer's role as temporary to keep the Kiss machine operational. The music industry, particularly for a band like Kiss with its massive overhead costs for tours, merchandise, and production, operates on tight schedules, where delays can result in lost revenue and diminished fan interest. However, from Carr's viewpoint and that of his family, the move felt like a profound betrayal. While battling for his life in hospital beds, undergoing painful procedures, and coping with the emotional weight of a terminal diagnosis, Carr perceived the hiring of Singer as a signal that he was being replaced. His identity was deeply tied to Kiss. He had dedicated over a decade to the band, contributing not only as a drummer, but as a songwriter on tracks like Little Caesar from Hot in the Shade. The thought of the group continuing without him exacerbated his emotional distress, compounding the physical agony of cancer treatment. Friends and family members later recounted how Carr felt sidelined, his role diminished at a time when he needed solidarity and inclusion to maintain his spirits. This controversy reflects deeper tensions in the rock music business of the era. Bands like Kiss were corporations as much as artistic collectives, with decisions driven by financial imperatives. The 1990s saw the industry grappling with shifting trends, grunge bands like Nirvana dominating charts, while glam metal acts like Kiss adapted to stay relevant. For Kiss, who had unmasked in 1983 to reveal their identities and focus on music over spectacle, Revenge was a critical album to reaffirm their hard rock credentials. The band's choice to proceed with Singer ensured the project's completion, but it came at the cost of straining relationships and leaving a legacy of debate among fans and biographers about loyalty versus pragmatism. Despite the devastating impact of his illness, Eric Carr demonstrated remarkable determination to remain part of KISS, pushing his physical limits in ways that highlighted his passion for music and the band. In July 1991, as chemotherapy ravaged his body, causing hair loss, weight loss, and chronic fatigue, Carr insisted on participating in the music video for God Gave Rock and Roll to You Too, a track recorded for the film Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. The song, a cover of an Argent classic with new lyrics, was intended as an uplifting anthem, but Carr's involvement turned it into a poignant statement of defiance. For the video shoot, Carr wore a wig to conceal his hair loss and appeared gaunt, his face marked by the pallor of illness. Yet his performance was charged with energy, his drumming forceful, and his presence commanding. Seated behind his kit, he played with a focus that belied his frailty, contributing backing vocals that added emotional depth to the track. The video, directed by Mark Rezica, featured the band in a dramatic setting with orchestral elements, but Carr's appearance stood out as a testament to his resolve. It became his final public performance, aired in theaters and on MTV, where viewers unaware of his condition saw only the rock star, not the man fighting for survival. Carr's desperation to contribute extended to the Revenge album. He pleaded with Paul Stanley to allow him to drum on at least one or two tracks, even if it meant recording in short bursts to accommodate his weakened state. His requests were rooted in a deep fear of obsolescence. Music was his identity, and exclusion felt like erasure. The band, concerned about his health and the album's tight schedule, declined, opting to use Eric Singer for all drumming. However, they incorporated Carr's contributions in other ways. The track Carr Jam 1981 was built around a drum solo he had recorded during a 1981 session, transformed into an instrumental tribute with added guitar work by Bruce Kulick. Intended as an homage, it carried the weight of a premature memorial, evoking mixed emotions among fans who recognized its significance. These efforts underscored Carr's character, resilient, passionate, and deeply committed to KISS. His insistence on participating despite physical limitations reflected the broader struggles of musicians facing health crises in an industry that rarely pauses. The video and album track served as his last artistic statements, preserving his legacy within the band's discography and highlighting the human cost of illness in the high-stakes world of rock stardom. As Carr's condition deteriorated, a sense of isolation compounded his physical suffering. In his final months, he reportedly felt distance from KISS, the group that had been his professional family for over a decade. While his biological family and girlfriend provided constant support, visiting him in the hospital, assisting with daily needs, and offering emotional solace, Carr perceived a growing gap with bandmates Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. Accounts from those close to him described feelings of abandonment as phone calls became less frequent and visits rarer. The reasons for this perceived distance remain debated. Simmons and Stanley have maintained they supported Carr financially and emotionally, covering medical costs and expressing hope for his recovery. However, the discomfort of confronting a bandmate's terminal illness may have played a role. The rock world, with its emphasis on invincibility, often struggles with vulnerability. Additionally, the band's focus on revenge, recording sessions, promotional planning, and business decisions demanded attention potentially diverting energy from personal matters. From Carr's perspective, this shift felt like a rejection, intensifying his sadness and sense of loss. Carr's cancer, initially confined to his heart, proved aggressive, spreading rapidly despite treatment. Atrial carcinoma, rare with only a few dozen cases reported annually, originates in the heart's atria and metastasizes quickly to organs like the lungs and brain due to the heart's central role in circulation. By mid-1991, tumors had invaded his lungs, causing respiratory distress and requiring oxygen support. Chemotherapy, while shrinking some masses, weakened his immune system, leading to infections and further complications. In September 1991, the disease reached his brain, triggering 2 massive hemorrhages. Rushed to the hospital, Carr underwent emergency surgery to relieve pressure, but the damage was extensive. He slipped into a coma, his body unable to recover from the cumulative toll of cancer and treatments. Surrounded by family, he passed away on November 24, 1991, at age 41. The official cause was complications from cancer, including cerebral hemorrhage. In a final cruel twist of fate, Freddie Mercury, the legendary frontman of Queen, died on the very same day. Mercury's death from complications of AIDS dominated the global headlines. The passing of Eric Carr, a beloved but less universally famous figure, was largely overshadowed. His death barely made a ripple in the mainstream press. The band released a statement mourning his loss, but just days later they were playing a concert in Pennsylvania. The show, as they say, must go on. For many heartbroken fans, it felt too soon, too cold, too much like business as usual. The fairy tale was over and the ending felt brutal and unjust. The legacy of Eric Carr is a complex one. Musically, his impact is undeniable. He was the bridge that carried Kiss from the 70s into the 80s. His powerful, heavy-hitting style updated their sound and allowed them to compete alongside the new wave of metal bands. Albums like Creatures of the Night and Lick It Up are classics of the era, and his drumming is a massive part of their power. He stabilized the band during a period of chaos and was a key ingredient in their successful second act. But his more enduring legacy is a human one. It lies in the deep personal connection he forged with millions of fans. He was the everyman in the land of gods, the humble grinder who got the golden ticket and never ever took it for granted. He proved that a replacement member didn't have to be a soulless clone, but could become a beloved and integral part of a band's story. The controversy surrounding his final years serves as a stark and tragic reminder of the often unseen human cost of the music industry, where loyalty and compassion can sometimes take a backseat to contracts and tour schedules. To this day, Eric Carr maintains a fiercely loyal fan base that keeps his memory alive. They share stories of his kindness, they praise his thunderous talent, and they defend his honor against a narrative that they feel has been unfairly controlled by the Kiss corporate entity. He is not a footnote in the band's history. For them, he is a central chapter, a story of a good man who deserved a better ending. In the end, we are left with the story of Eric Carr, a man who got everything he ever wanted, but at an unimaginable price. He ascended from obscurity to the world stage, put on the mask, and became the Fox. He lived a life that was louder, bigger, and more extraordinary than he could have ever imagined. But when the mask came off, and he needed his bandmates most, many feel he was left to face the final curtain largely alone. His story is not just about rock and roll. It's about dreams, disillusionment, and the quiet dignity of a man who, even in the face of death, just wanted to get back behind his drums and play. He is remembered not just for the thunderous beat he gave to a legendary band, but for the gentle heart he shared with anyone who was lucky enough to meet him. That is a legacy no controversy can ever diminish. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.